everyone, Captain Sean here, and if you've browsed through my channel and blog before, then you know I am a big fan of Girl Meets World. It's an amazing show that, while still being a comedy, tackles all sorts of relatable social issues that viewers of all ages can relate to and learn something from. But that being said, even I'm not going to deny this show isn't perfect. There have been some not so good episodes. Now, to be fair, making an episodic TV series where nearly every story brings up a completely new relatable topic and narrative conflict can be quite hard. However, it's time to take the kid gloves off and shine some light on when this show just couldn't succeed that well. And FYI, if you have seen every single Girl Meets World review video on my channel, there will be some repeating of information here, just saying. And so now, let's get on with this. This is the top 10 worst Girl Meets World episodes. Number 10, Girl Meets the Truth, a season 1 episode that isn't necessarily that bad, but not very sophisticated or well done. In this episode, while Riley tells Farkle a lie about his acting capabilities in order to make him feel better, Mai gets caught in her own web of lies related to a necklace she has sort of stolen. Despite the episode tackling a simple message of being truthful in a way that works well for kids, it really is a story to be only enjoyed by kids, no one else. A decent story, but not much to write home about. And now let's move on to number 9, Girl Meets 1961. One of the oddest episodes of the series, as the kids learn about their grandparents, and then a series of flashbacks showcases the lives of the kids' grandparents, who look just like their grandkids in the flashbacks. The whole concept of this episode is a bit weird, with the idea of just seeing the actors play different characters in the 1960s not really seeming necessary. However, the plot isn't too bad, and the major thing Boy Meets World fans will enjoy is we finally discover why Topanga's parents gave Topanga her name. Next we have number 8, Girl Meets Rules. Now this episode gives us a portrayal of the forbidden experiment that should never be done in a school anywhere. What if the teachers were gone and the students had no rules? Thus, they could do whatever they want. In this episode, after Corey gives his entire class after-school detention, but then leaves the building, that's exactly what happens. Things get crazy as half the class goes into Lord of the Flies style insanity, while the other half tries to remain calm. However, everyone eventually realizes that very little gets done without rules. There's another message in this episode, though, about how people change people for the better, or how, friends change friends for the better. And while it's a nice message, it would have been nice for an episode about why we have rules to be more focused on the importance of rules. It's not a very bad half hour of comedy, but it's a story that feels unfocused at times and misses the opportunity to delve into why we have rules and laws in our society. And now for number 7, Girl Meets the Telltale Tot. In the story, Maya wants to follow Riley's Uncle Josh to a party he's attending at a college he's just gotten enrolled into. However, the party is at night, and if Riley is going to support her friend, she needs to sneak out of the house very late at night without telling her parents. Due to the insane level of pressure that builds up in Riley's mind, due to her lying to her parents, her conscience takes the form of a talking tater tot. Okay, this episode is just plain weird most of the time. Overall, it's a goofier story, especially with the talking tater tot scenes, but I will admit the jokes aren't their best in this episode, but I do think they kind of work for a younger audience. However, there are some interesting social commentaries that weave their way underneath the main story, though. For example, when Riley and Maya sneak into the college campus, everyone there assumes they're also college students. This is actually the most plausible part in the plot, since there are many middle school girls in our world who are just as tall as the average female college student. However, it's also a good commentary on how potentially dangerous it can be for middle school girls to just walk onto a college campus without adult supervision, as those girls could be mistaken for an adult, and that could lead to some very negative circumstances. Something which the episode really doesn't explore, unfortunately. Now, there is some interesting material that does happen in this episode between Maya and Josh, but the mostly flat comedy, weird talking tater tot scenes, and negligence on the writer's part of really exploring the full length of how dangerous it is for middle school girls to sneak onto a college campus puts this story here on this list. And now, for number 6, Girl Meets She Don't Like Me. The main plot of the episode revolves around Riley going into shock when a new girl she tries to become friends with automatically doesn't like her, along with the additional shock Riley gains when she realizes that she doesn't have full control over how other people treat her. This is further extended into her health class when Riley doesn't like how her current health teacher is teaching a subject matter that she believes should be taught and handled in a more delicate manner, which involves a series of scenes in which many mature inferences and humor for the show are made. Now, considering Riley's backstory of coming from a near-perfect family, it makes sense that she has a hard time dealing with rejection and unpleasant circumstances. But one could argue being a girl who has learned so many important life lessons from great role models in her life should actually have helped her be more prepared to deal with this type of hardship. Not the worst story focusing on Riley, but a real low point for her character and the series as a whole. And now next up we have number 5, Girl Meets Hollyworld. Now in this episode we find out one of the students in the class is a father who is a Hollywood movie maker and is creating a story based on the lives of some of the characters, most notably the journey of Maya's mother, Katie. With Katie obviously wanting to audition for a role based on herself, Maya goes to great lengths to help her mother win the role by kidnapping the competition, a famous actress. Now, the Maya being a kidnapper scenes are the weirdest part of the episode. The actors do give some pretty entertaining performances, but the whole scenario just feels off for some reason. It could be that Maya being a kidnapper does seem out of character for her, although Maya looking out for the best interests of her mother does still align with how she's grown. It's just a little weird though how everyone reacts so casually goofy about the whole scenario. Now, the casualness is explained by the famous actress being an old friend of Maya's mother. However, that doesn't completely excuse every action we see in the story. Now, the episode does address an important concept, that being sometimes friendships fall apart. However, the episode spends more time addressing the concept rather than telling a well-done and fully fleshed out story with it. A real low point in the series' characters and its writing. Next we have number 4, Girl Meets Sneak Attack. In this early season 1 episode, Riley starts to get depressed when a girl at school begins flirting with Lucas, a boy who at this point in the series, Riley has known for less than a month. Now overall, this episode is just weak. This story is very predictable and contains all the bad cliches people associate with modern children's entertainment. Now in retrospect, you could argue the story is made to create a starting point in Riley's character development, by starting her character at a low point in terms of self-confidence. But having the series mainly get depressed over having a new girl flirt with a boy she barely knows just feels like a plotline from a typical sitcom and not a more well-written one, which Girl Meets World usually is. Later episodes in the series would do a much better job at explaining to young viewers that girls can do more with their lives than just be jealous about some boy. But this episode sadly misses that point by far. And now for number 3, Girl Meets Communism. The beginning of the story features Maya being brought before the school honor board for cheating during a test, and Farkle is brought up as well since he let Maya cheat off of his test. This early part of the story features the series stars acting very out of character at first, since one would think that events over the last year would have made the characters act a little more intelligent than thinking that cheating is okay. Despite this major flaw in character development though, it does jumpstart the better part of the plot. The young characters, while on trial, make their defense being that every student deserves to be treated the same despite whatever ethical or unethical methods that they choose. This causes the characters to suddenly desire to become communists, since their desires seem to match up with the ideals of communism. However, the biggest turning point in the story is when Cory Matthews then treats his communist students the same, by giving them all the same test with a grade of a C on it. When the students are upset for getting a C, despite some of them really deserving an A, Cory explains that traditionally, a C in school means average, and how in a communist society, there are no rewards for individuals that exceed average expectations, or motivation to exceed those expectations. Now this episode in its second half does a very good job at tackling its social issue, and the strengths of this episode are actually the best strengths you'll see in any episode covered in this top 10 list. But the beginning of the episode with its backwards character development, featuring the younger characters thinking both cheating and communism are okay, just drags the quality of the episode down really, really far. And now for number 2, Girl Meets Sassy Haltertop. The story tries to tackle the age-old question of, are people inherently good or evil? From the very question alone, you'd think this would be an incredibly deep episode. Unfortunately, though, the question is so deep for the show that it causes it to start drowning. The main focus of the episode starts on Riley, who, while on the school debate team, has to prepare for the debate topic of whether people are inherently good or inherently evil. However, usually optimistic Riley is given the task of debating on the side of people being inherently evil. Now, there is good potential with the story concept, such as when Riley and Maya do some research on problems going on in the world, and you see Riley go into shock when she realizes the level of issues happening on our planet. However, in an attempt to perhaps make this story more appropriate for young child audiences, the episode never shows or discusses the specific problems Riley and Maya research. All you see is their facial expressions when they do research on the computer, and that they later simply mention the words war, poverty, and disease existing. But without specific examples of what Riley and Maya actually researched, the emotional weight of the scenes in this episode is lost. Now, there still are positive aspects in this episode. The only specific world problem brought up in the episode is that there's too much trash on New York City beaches. So Augie, learning about this, decides he wants to pick up trash on an area of the beach one day. After doing so, though, Augie is given doubts on whether or not he truly made a difference in the world. But Topanga helps explain to Augie that making a positive difference on any level is still making a positive difference in the world. It's a well-done moment, and it would work very well if the entire episode was about, the topic of making a positive difference in a world full of large problems. But that's not what the episode presents its main focus as. The focus is supposed to be on whether or not it is people's nature that causes those problems. Now, Girl Meets World always inserts some comedy into its more deeper and darker episodes, and usually it works. However, in an episode that tackles such a deep topic, the comedy at times in the story can really detract from how important this presented topic is. Plus, in an attempt to make Riley look very shocked about the problems going on in the world, the series seems to temporarily forget that Riley has previously been very well aware of world issues such as specific wars, women's rights, and diseases such as malaria, which was explored in past episodes. So Riley's looks of shock in this episode have less meaning if you've been watching every episode of this series. Plus, there are a lot of points presented in this episode that many psychology and philosophy majors could potentially disagree with. However, there is one point in this episode that does tackle this difficult to discuss topic well. When Corey at home tells Riley a lesson he's told Riley before, how people can change people for the better, but that when we refuse to keep learning from a world of people that can help us to be better, that is when you are an evil person. It's a nice moment that by itself, that if it was expanded, could have made this a much more profound story. This is an episode that obviously went in with extremely good intentions, but just couldn't stay focused or fully explore the extreme depths of this very complicated topic well. Now, the positives that can be taken out of this episode are the short moments of Augie realizing how positive changes do make a difference in the world, and Corey's short talk with Riley about how learning from the world can make you be better. Also, this episode could be used as a great excuse for parents to start discussing the aforementioned topics to their kids more appropriately, or start a more appropriate series of debates amongst older audience members. And also, another problem the story had was, there wasn't a serious conflict about good versus evil happening in the main characters' personal lives during this episode. In Girl Meets Money, while learning about money, Farkle's family loses almost all of it. In Girl Meets the Forgiveness Project, while learning about forgiveness, Maya confronts her father. In this episode, Riley isn't confronting an individual doing something evil. She's mostly just thinking about the concept. A good story with a life lesson needs a more serious personal conflict in order to keep the emotional stakes high. A more appropriate time to bring up this topic could have been during Girl Meets Riley Town, when Riley was bullied, causing her to wonder why someone would do such an evil thing. A very flawed episode with a lot of missed opportunity. And now, for number 1, Girl Meets STEM. In this story, Riley gets upset when all of the girls during a science class project wind up getting relegated to unimportant tasks while the boys do all the actual real scientific research. The episode, while created with all good intents, is a bit behind the times. In the episode, none of the other girls are interested in science. Now, while it is possible to find a few classrooms out there with no girls that are interested in science, this episode seems to tell the audience that no females anywhere think they can become scientists. The show's writers apparently haven't done their research well, as many major universities now have both enrollments and graduates in their scientific fields that are well more than 40% female, and in some schools it's well over 50%. It'd be one thing if the episode presented the girls as being uncertain if they can be as successful in science with the boys, only to be told that they can. But the science teacher himself in the episode says that most of the girls in his 35 years of teaching didn't show any interest in science. Now, I will admit that research I found says that in the engineering, mechanical, and electronics workforce, men still hold a very high majority. However, the one scientific-related workforce that women are growing in right now is apparently chemistry-related jobs. And chemistry is exactly what the characters were doing in this episode. What also makes this episode not work too well is that it seems to boil the issue of gender inequality in our world down to one simple problem. Girls think they can't do things boys can do. However, there is much greater complexity to this issue. Perhaps it would have been smarter if the episode also discussed how equality for women in the workforce has improved over the last several decades, but still mentioned the specific areas where inequality still exists. However, a more relevant issue that the episode could have addressed is how race and socioeconomic status has an even more dramatic effect on people's perceptions of being able to achieve their academic and career goals, as that would have been a much more relevant topic to a greater number of people in our culture today. Now, I know actress Rowan Blanchard is an outspoken feminist, and she said that she felt like this episode was a very important story to her, but this episode really feels like a story that had a very missed opportunity to tackle some very important specific issues, and instead featured a very simplified story that would have worked better on television like 30 years ago. And on an extra note, I was talking to one of my former female middle school students a few days after I watched this episode, and she said that she felt like the plot of The Girl Meets STEM would have worked a lot better if the story revolved around the girls dealing with feeling inferior in gym class or a gender-mixed sports program. She said that in her experience in gym class, teachers usually call upon boys to lead examples or always take the lead in a sports game. According to her, she said that she would have found it much more empowering to see some female characters taking the lead in a sports event or a gym class in the story versus just a science class environment. Now that would make a much more interesting plot for a future episode. Now, despite me not liking every episode of Girl Meets World, I still usually appreciate what the episodes are always trying to do. This was the first episode where I felt like it just failed at what it was attempting. So with all of these flaws, one would ask, do I still like this show? Absolutely. Well, I will go on record right now and say that I love Avatar: The Last Airbender for being one of the only shows in television history that by design is absolutely perfect. There is something that Girl Meets World has that shows like Avatar don't. Girl Meets World has simple and relevant life lessons that all people can relate and learn from. The majority of the show's run has focused on the moral lessons that one learns when you go from being a kid to being a teenager, and eventually from being a teenager to slowly becoming an adult. The show has taught us that growing up isn't easy. Listening to the adults in your life has value. Getting a proper education is important. Friendship is very special. Love takes both time and effort to grow. And above all else, to always do good. So even though the show is flawed, it does show us that something flawed, whether it's a person or a TV show, can still be used to do something amazing. And many of those amazing things we'll be looking at very soon when we analyze the top 10 best Girl Meets World episodes.